Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Flipgrid conversation about race, equity, and justice. My name is Janae Armand. I'm Head of Educator Innovation at Flipgrid, and we are here today once again to have an important dialogue. Our mission at Flipgrid is to have every learner on this planet share their voice but also respect the diverse voices of others. Because we know when that happens, something called global empathy is built. And once students have that thing called empathy, they can look at certain situations and make better decisions throughout life and really change our world. So without further ado, I welcome you to this conversation. If you are tuning in around the world, please share with us your location, the city, state, country that you're viewing in from. We are so happy to have you here. Our conversation today is centered around how we as educators can truly empower our students to be activists, allies, and also anti-racist in the work that we do. And so I've put together a panel of incredible creative thought leaders who will share a little bit about their journey, some tips and ideas for you as educators to maybe to think about, to implement into your classroom so that we can also be a part of this work because it is a journey for all of us. So we will start off our conversation with a few introductions, and we will start off today with Brandan. Welcome, Brandan. We are so excited here. Please tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do at Studio B.
Peace. I'm happy to be here. Thank you for the invitation. I'm a visual artist from New Orleans, Louisiana. Um, I've been engaged in this process of painting in public spaces, large murals, and understanding the responsibility and power that comes from the idea of art and being an artist. I have a space in New Orleans called Studio B. It's a large warehouse that's filled with art that we try our best to use as a community space, as a space for education and learning. And it's been a blessing, this journey of being an artist, and I'm grateful to be here. Thank you for having me.
Incredible. So now we are going to introduce our friend Santi. Santi is the founder of Project Recess and some other incredible innovative tools that really put equity in the forefront of everything that they do. So Santi, welcome.
Hey, Journey. Thank you for hosting this. Very honored to be here. My name is Santi Khairassame, first generation son of immigrants from Thailand and the Philippines. Started, as Journey said, a company called Project Recess, which works with public schools in New York City and training teachers on how to use various technology tools, as well as creating multimedia experiences for teachers as well as students. So I personally have a background in digital media, TV production and video editing and production. And I do what I can to share those tools and those resources with the educators that I work with. So very humbled and honored to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Santi. And now our good friend, Al. So guys, like Al has been a student voice ambassador for Flipgrid for many, many years. We know how incredible he is. If you ever see Al out, he has a camera with him along the way, capturing the moment. And most recently, Al also joined our Flipgrid Diversity and Inclusion Advisory Board. So Al, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Oh, Journey, thank you for the opportunity to join in on the discussion. So my name is Al Thomas. I go by EduCopilot in just about all the spaces. And so I am an educator, photographer, visual storyteller. I enjoy helping people learn the power of creativity and what it can do to create opportunities. And so hopefully the discussion that we will be able to dive in is to be able to kind of pull back the veil and be able to have an openness to be able to bring creativity to the classroom and to create as many opportunities as possible for students to really embrace their unique voice through it. So excited to be here. Looking forward to a great conversation.
Thank you, Al. And so now, guys, you know, the savvy educator is always inspired by everything that I see, I read, And so I was just scrolling through Instagram one day and I came across this incredible story of a student who created a game to teach others about systems of oppression. And of course, it touched my mind and my soul, and I had to reach out. So welcome, Toiell. I would love for you to just share a little bit about yourself and your journey with our educator community.
So, thank you so much. Hi, everyone. So I'm Toiell Washington. So I'm a student currently at Salem State, but I'm a Boston native. So I recently just launched a game company called The Master's Tools. And the game company is basically about, starting conversations and teaching people about systems of oppression, but through gaming. And so my first game card, Meet the Colonizers, talks all about pretty much just exposing American heroes, systems, and ideas, and kind of just bringing up the new, buried stories that get lost in history books and, history classes. So I'm super excited to talk more about it. And just join you guys in talking about, transformative justice and education through different lenses.
Awesome. So excited to have you here. And, that goes to show no matter where you are, you can make an impact on just anyone by sharing what you're doing. So thank you so much, Toiell, for what you're doing. And finally, without further ado, our resident tequity expert, Ken Shelton, just share with our educator community a little bit about yourself, although I have a feeling that many of them know you already.
Yeah, so thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. This is a great panel. So I'm looking forward to being a part of the conversation, but more importantly, listening to my fellow panelists here. Can I be considered a friend of the show at this point because you've had me on so much? Okay, good. Yeah, so for those of you that don't know, I'm Ken Shelton. I'm a Los Angeles-based educator. I worked in the Los Angeles Unified School District for 18 years. Most of my time was middle school, and most of that was teaching in a technology lab. So the dialogue that we're going to have is along the lines of all the stuff I've talked about in previous panel discussions around equity, around cultural competency, around voice, access. And I'm really happy that you're doing this, Journée, for several reasons, because we've already seen it with the other panelists. Is a whole idea. In fact, Al and I have had this dialogue, and it's such a privilege to be able to engage in it like this. Is what I guess the thing I'll share is one of the things it took me several years to realize is the true impact and power of being in an openly creative and authentic space can be for a learner's liberation. And we just heard about it a little bit right there. So I can't wait to share a little bit more of my perspective, but more specifically, my own observations of what it meant for my students to be able to be in what I would call a judgmental free zone for their creativity.
Absolutely. So we know that every day in our world, there are instances where we see injustices occur. We see the inequities across our schools, our communities, our world. And so we are here today to have a conversation about how do we use that creativity that's within each one of us, and as well as our students, to really empower them to be the activists, the allies, and also the anti-racists that are necessary for this work to continue on and for a change to happen within our world. And so we know the journey starts somewhere for everyone. So we're going to start off with our first question today. When and how did you know you wanted to use your creativity for change? So we'll open this up to our panelists. Just kind of think back to that moment. Sometimes, our catalyst for change is a moment where we may feel energized. It may be a moment of frustration. It may be a moment of anxiety. So those emotions can evoke that change. And so I would love to hear where your journey began.
I can start. So I got into doing these games, I like to say by accident, because it definitely wasn't like a plan or something that I just decided to do. I was actually just making tea one day, and thinking about how to create a workshop for the school to prison pipeline, to teach some of my students. And the way I had created it, I realized that if I changed the formatting a bit, it could be a game. And so with that, I kind of just started coming up with the content and create the game. And then 2 weeks later, I thought about something else, and it kind of turned into a thing that I was doing pretty much all throughout the pandemic, creating games, and decided, to show them. But I think that my love for learning games in general started when I was in the 3rd grade. I was actually held back because I did so poorly in math. And the year after, my teacher used to send me to the math lab for the last 20 minutes of class. And I used to go on this site called firstinmath.com, where I played math games. And I had so much fun with it that I started playing them at home. And it got to the point where I actually became advanced in math. And so the next year and all the years after, I was actually going and doing math again with my original class, all the way out and through high school, pretty much. And so I've always had a love for learning games, because I feel like people don't accommodate different learning styles, especially the whole lecture, PowerPoint, chalkboard thing. A lot of people don't like that. And a lot of teachers recognize that, but they still continue on. So I always kind of just enjoyed non-traditional learning from there.
As an educator, I'm smiling over here, Toiell, because it's not what you do, it's how you do it, right? And for us to meet the needs of every learner, we have to know them. We have to know what works for them, what gets them energized, what makes them want to know more and be curious, right? Because curiosity is the beginning of all learning. So thank you so much for sharing that journey, because once again, our students who are sitting in our classroom, they have the capabilities to do all of these things. We just have to give them the space in order to do so. So I would love to hear from any other panelists about how or when did you know you wanted to use your creativity out for change?
Yeah, I guess I'll go next. And so I think for me, it started at a pretty young age. I had the privilege of having a great older brother who unfortunately made some choices and some decisions that landed him into a variety of different situations, and eventually going into prison and serving time. And I think for me, part of the struggle I had is that I knew my brother from a very young age, and I knew how creative and how smart he was, and how he always seemed to have this engineer mind. And I remember very vividly the conversation that people started to have when he made one bad choice, how it snowballed into people starting to label him and create this narrative about him. And so for me, it's always been where creativity allowed me to kind of push back against that and be able to empower me to be able to share and communicate my story, or the authentic story that is really there, instead of this false narrative that often gets shared, or where people end up getting labels. Because I saw what that did to my brother. I saw how it created this mental acceptance of how people perceived him. And so he was just going to live and he was going to act it out. And I would just say, for me, it was really about just taking that power back to be able to visually tell those stories that I saw on a daily basis, whether that was in my community, using photography, using video, to be able to really be able to tell stories that I was seeing on a daily basis. The power and the incredible giftedness of people that oftentimes were just labeled as misfits, or just they were not going to be anything, and that they were still grinding away and being able to create opportunities. So I've always had this part of me that just wants to be able to share those real stories, and not just this, I guess, just to push back against those false narratives that are often put out there in the world. So.
Incredible. Thank you so much, Al. All right. Brandan, Santi, Ken, when did you know you wanted to use your creativity for change?
I think for me, to speak, it was I always knew that being a creative was something that came natural. That's something that I felt like that I did well based off of the affirmation of my peers. I remember being as young as 2nd, 3rd grade and just seeing my classmates get excited about what I was creating and drawing. as I got older, I began to connect it to the impact of it just by the examples that I looked up to. I was always surrounded by examples of people who understood being of service to others. You know, my father is a pastor as well as he's a retired Marine. And so there was always this idea of service, this idea of what you do, how it impacts others. And then as I began to learn and understand, I've always been a fan of history. As I began to learn and understand through the lens of history, all the great Black artists that understood that responsibility. I became really a student of that idea of like how they use their art to speak to the times as well as to speak to the possibility of the future. And so it just became something that I felt that I had to do. You know, it felt like something that if I didn't do it that way, that I was not doing justice to the gift that was given to me. And so, yeah, that transition happened towards high school, going into college. I began to make that change.
Incredible, Brandan. And, you know, I see that impact every day as I am driving from my home to my parents' home. Every now and then I see an RTA bus with one of Brandan's piece of artwork. And it is nothing but sheer joy and positivity, you know, especially for Black and Brown students who sometimes don't see themselves amplified in things that are around them. So, Brandan, I just want to know, like, how do you feel knowing that your artwork is like traveling around, you know, the city, putting smiles and maybe some encouragement into students' lives?
I mean, it's definitely a good thing. You know what I mean? I think that creating and knowing that it has that impact, to know that it's reaching people, to know that, you know, I think as a creator, we all know we lose agency over what we create the minute we create it. You know, it goes out into the world, and we can't necessarily always control how that impact is felt. And so, anytime I hear things like what you said, it makes me feel like, you know, that things are going the way I would hope they would, in terms of the way it impacts people, the way people are seeing themselves reflected in the various spaces that the artwork has been placed. So I'm grateful that I'm able to do that and continue to figure out ways to do more of it.
Absolutely. And, you know, as you mentioned, Brandan, you know, like we have that agency. We have to think about the agency that we have in everything that we do. And I know our friend Santi, he is an innovator, just such an incredible mind. And I know, Santi, you saw some inequities when it came to testing with, you know, our students, and then the opportunities that their teachers have to learn and to grow. And you took matters into your own hands. So just really curious, how did you know, and when did you know you wanted to use that creativity for change?
Yeah, so I didn't mention this in my intro, but I grew up in Chicago. And in high school, I had a really great multimedia teacher that really introduced the class to video editing and digital photography. It was my first time, you know, dabbling in that, and, you know, something clicked, something sort of like made me realize that this is sort of the type of work that I wanted to do. So I went to school for that. And then my first job out of undergrad was actually as a teaching artist for this organization in Chicago called After School Matters. And I would teach things, as I mentioned, like TV production, animation. And I remember toward the end of the year, one of my students asked me to write them a letter of recommendation, which I thought was interesting because I only saw these kids after school a couple of days a week. And first of all, to have that honor of writing a letter of rec for a student was great. So I did that. The student got into college, and I said to myself, you know, education, you know, this role where you can really help sort of students gain that level of expertise and move on in their lives. That's something that I wanted to pursue even further. So I moved to New York to pursue a degree in ed tech. And so as you were saying, Journey, about sort of inequities in testing, I helped found a charter school that focused on English language learners. And we realized that standardized tests are not the best way to assess someone's ability. So one of my friends and I, we started a digital portfolio company called OpenSchool ePortfolio, which is essentially a simple idea, just give teachers a way to assess students in an alternative mode, you know, something other than a standardized test. So we spent a couple of years working on this app, and it's being used by by people in America, other countries, but that's one way. I try to use my creativity, my technical background to try to create an avenue to support people to assess other students in an alternative way.
Awesome. And I'm all about empowering every voice. And when it comes to understanding what a child knowing can do, when you leave it up to their creativity, you learn so much more as an educator. I think, that's one reason why I've always loved Flipgrid from the get-go, because it gives that space for students to be able to share in the way that they want to and that they can, versus putting them all in a box and giving them these standardized testings, which we know our students are not made standardized, right? So that's beautiful. Thank you so much, Santi, for leading that work in this education space. And Ken, Ken, oh my goodness, we've known each other now for years, and I'm always blown away by your creativity with the camera. And I know, unfortunately, especially this year, we've witnessed as a global community just these situations of injustice. These things have happened over time, but I think right now the whole world is a little slower. People are more in tune to what's happening right now. And I know you've captured some moments on your camera, but I know it just didn't start now. So when and how did you know you wanted to use your...
Yeah, so for me, I think honestly, it's almost an accumulation of all the previous panelists. So the first part, even to what Toiell shared, the idea of recognizing that we still force students to operate within a colonized curriculum, and that we only measure what we value. And that's why, even with what Santi shared around the standardization of testing and things like that, I remember getting into honestly quite heated arguments with many of my colleagues as a classroom teacher around the idea that people place a value on what we call creativity, and it reminded me of growing up. So for me, early on in my schooling, I did all kinds of things. I mean, back then I used film. I actually learned how to take a black sweatshirt and then close up the one end of it and have a portable darkroom. So I was working with chemicals and prints all the way back then. I learned watercolors, I did pastels, I did ceramics, I did all these things that for me, it goes back to what I shared before, is that we only measure what we value. And to me, it was a value that was never measured, because anytime it was in a formalized educational setting, it was always where it's not good enough for this or it's not good enough for that. And that's why I always share with folks, creativity is in the eye of the beholder. And so for me, when I became a classroom teacher, there were several things that I recognized early in my career as a teacher. One is that artistic expression, whether it's through different mediums of photography, video, painting, whatever, that is a window into the stories and the experiences of the artist. And I remember one of the most important things I did early on was exposing my students to all of the different artistic representations that were part of the Harlem Renaissance. So I will share with everyone, my favorite by far still is Jacob Lawrence. And when you start to understand about the Great Migration and then how that served as both a historical as well as a creative expression for his representation of that, you go into other things where later in life, one of my favorites was Ernie Barnes as well. And so then you add to the fact that when I go into the idea around liberation, one of the things that even Al and I have talked about this is I wanted all of my students to recognize that whatever that test tells you, whatever a teacher tells you, do not internalize it as a value of what you can create and what you can do. You see, the whole idea around, to me, creativity is it's a cognitive process based on the conditions that you set up. So what I would usually do with my students is I would have them produce, for example, documentaries of the community. And we went through what is the structure of different types of documentaries? What is the format that it has to be produced within? Even things like, what is the time limit? But ultimately, the whole idea was, I want you to represent the stories of your community through your eyes. Most of the time it was photography or video production, because the kids generally gravitated towards visual representation. But I even remember challenging them, like, what are the sounds of your community? And so the whole idea for me was using creativity for change is really just, how am I able to utilize whatever, and this goes to equity, of course, but how am I able to utilize my own internal storytelling mechanisms and then the equipment that I might have access to, which is a whole nother thing I hope that we will dive into a little bit more later, to be able to create representations of what's important to me. And then my main thing with students was, do not let a critic essentially stifle or muffle your voice, because in some cases I'm real curious from other panelists here, what I have found even on a personal level is that your artistic expression isn't for everyone. The key is the more you put it out there, you will be able to find your audience. And then the more you find your audience, the more it will drown out the naysayers and the critics. The hard part for our students is that their primary audience generally tends to be that singular educator, and they are not encouraged to put it out there. So that's why I love Toyell's story big time.
Absolutely. And it's a perfect segue. Thank you so much, Ken. Makes my job a little easier. When we're talking about students and their passion and their creativity, we know that there's situations that are happening every day in the students' community, outside of the community, globally, et cetera, that they're looking at. And of course, so many emotions can be formed by what our students are witness to. And so just a quick question, how do you really use your passion and creativity to address those reactions that you may have to current events? I'm speaking, I know Toiell and Brandan, outside of the education space and the work that you both are doing, how do you use that creativity to kind of put it out there? Because I've learned so much, but in so many different ways from both Brandan and Toiell. So I would love to hear both of your perspectives on this.
Yeah, I can go, sure. So I think that just in general, when we think about the idea of creativity, like we automatically go to like you being like an artist, or you being a singer, or anything of that nature. And I think I like to take it a step further and just think that being a creative, or something that is creative, is just something that's non-traditional, and stepping outside of the box, right? Stepping outside of the norm. And just when aligning it with this work, thinking about how the traditions of this country are off, right? Like when I think about conservatives, it's like, what are we conserving exactly? Because the traditions of this country, especially being a Black woman in this country, they are off. And so I first just kind of tried to think about that and think about what does it mean to be creative, and how can I bring that into my work? Because I never considered myself to be that. But what I did consider myself to be is very passionate about this work, and very passionate about getting it out to people, no matter how I'm doing that. And as I mentioned before, the lecturing whole PowerPoint thing, it doesn't work for everyone. And so I had to try to think about, like, how can I create something that's going to be digestible, and accessible, and something that someone's going to want to be interested in, especially with the conversations, that I'm having. It's very hard to start those conversations and stay engaged with them, right? We don't want to continue to promote Black trauma, right? So sometimes you don't want to see a video of something going on. That could be very traumatic, especially if that's your lived experience. You don't want to do that. We don't want to watch a movie. I'm tired of seeing Black trauma movies. Like, I don't want to see that. And so just thinking about, how can I bring the conversation to the table in a way that is not going to traumatize someone, that is not going to bore someone, that is not going to be something that someone's going to feel like, oh, now I have to do this extra work, right? So even if you're trying to start surface levels conversations, and so that's why I decided to go with my games, because it's like, one, this is something I'm very passionate about, and just also like being a Black person, and Black people are very creative. Like we usually have like a humor in our hurt type of situation, like we joke about everything, and it's how we learn, how we get through things. And so I decided everyone loves Uno, everyone loves these games, that you can kind of just sit around with your family and enjoy. So why not turn, something like this into a game where you can have the conversation. I made sure to not only make it an educational game, but make it something that can be a family game, something that people can laugh at, something that, people can enjoy. So it's not just let's do a trivia thing like we're at school playing Jeopardy, but actually, engaging in the conversation and also encouraging to self-educate. Because one game and one game company is not going to teach you everything you need to know about this work, but it will encourage you to go, oh, I didn't know that. I need to go on Google. I need to go get this book. Now I want to go watch the documentary or listen to that podcast because I didn't know that before. And so just thinking about that and kind of thinking about how people operate and what can I say to kind of like eye open a little bit. And just figuring how do I tie that into something that can be enjoyable, as well. Because that's the hardest part, thinking about what is going to make someone want to continue with this. Because even if you post, I don't know, a PDF, of a social theory, someone might read, the first couple sentences and they're like, all right, I'm tired. And so doing something that could start surface level conversations that hopefully can encourage more.
Absolutely. And when I bought the game, I went through and I was shocked at some of the things that I did not know. So it made me do that exact same thing. It got me inquisitive, had me researching. So twofold, you don't know what you don't know, but when you know, you do better, right? That's what Dr. Maya Angelou said. Like, so thank you so much, because it is one of those things where, I think especially now, it's 2021, and there's so many students out there wondering, why is it like this? They sit there and wonder, but they don't know about the systems of oppression. They don't know the history because it's not being taught in their classrooms. So thank you so much to you and the Master's Tools for just inspiring that opportunity to seek out information for yourself and to really self-educate. So Brandan, how do you do this with visual arts? Because your art can be seen in so many cities, inspiring people in so many ways.
I think the blueprint to tomorrow is in our imagination. That's a quote from Robin D.G. Kelly, who wrote Freedom Dream, a Black Radical Imagination, which is a book we've been using a lot in the past year in terms of navigating how important creativity is and just the imagination is as it lends itself to liberation. And so I think it's important because for youth, especially, they have a way better grasp at this than we do. The older we get, the more accustomed we are to the structures that exist. And as we talk about dismantling things, or as we talk about like changing things, what's required with that is an imagination that allows us to see what we replace that with. And so I think that the creativity is super important as we think through what the future looks like. Because I think being an artist, the way I like to frame it is two ideas. One, like Nina Simone said, that it's the artist's duty to reflect the times, to be almost a mirror to what's happening. But then I think there's another side of that as well that says that we have this ability to see beyond what's in front of us as well. And so I think allowing people or giving them agency to explore their creativity, to see what's possible on the horizon is an important tool as we think about change or creating change. It doesn't happen on its own. It's not like the artists or the creatives are the only ones who are going to lead us into the future. But when it's in connection with movement, when it's connection with understanding of the past and understanding of the present, then I think art is a powerful weapon. The lines we draw in the sand that separate us, whether it's culturally, whether it's geographically, the things that often are allowed in first, the thing that we allow to pierce our bubble first is typically the art and culture. The community that you're afraid of, before you let the person in your door, you're going to let the food in your door, you're going to let the music in your door, you're going to let the cinema in your door, you're going to let the books and the literature. And so we understand that there's a great responsibility that art and creativity has to unify us, because we're the ones who are often the first ones in the door. And so getting students to understand that their story is so important, because that's often the first thing that people are going to let in the door. That's going to lead to more empathy, lead to this radical imagination that'll hopefully, get us out where we are.
Thank you so much, Brandon. And just leaving off with the stories aspect, we know the importance of storytelling. When we hear someone's story, especially watching someone tell their story, it brings you a little closer to them, to their lived experience, to their piece of that catalyst to make the change in their life. And every single one of our students has that story. So I'm really curious with the educators that we have on today, Al, Ken, Santi, how might allowing our students to express their emotions through art or other creative outlets lead to positive changes? What are maybe some things that you've done or that you've seen educators do across our world?
I can go real quick. I first of all, hat tip to Toiell. I'm wondering how many folks are able to connect the name of your game to the Audre Lorde quote. I hope it serves as. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Sorry, I was just gonna say, because I was probably gonna get into that because nobody really knew where I got it from, but I thought it would be nice for people who are actually into social theory. The master's tools will never dismantle the master's house.
Right.
So that's where I got it from, but I'm actually just gonna let him go because I know they have a lot to share. Right
on. Thank you. So Journée, a couple of things. So in regards to your question, I would challenge everyone watching to consider the following. In the question you mentioned allowing students, and I equate the allowing to the whole idea in educational circles where you hear about, oh, it's about student voice and choice. Listen, unless you have interrogated your own thinking and you truly, truly have an equitable learning environment, that voice and choice is usually limited to whatever the teacher centers around the choices you have and whose voices matter. And so in regards to positive change, for me, a couple of things that I really, really stressed, not only when I was in a classroom, but I stress now. The question I ask is, for example, why is it that low performing schools that, let's start off with the fact that they're under-resourced, one of the first things that gets stripped from the school is anything related to the arts. And my theory, or actually rather my hypothesis, is that it is a way of removing at least one element of the potential for you to use your voice. It's the same, and I'm curious to hear at some point, if possible, what Brandon's thoughts are on this. It's the same reason why you go into one zip code as street art and you go into another zip code and it's called graffiti. And so for me, the whole idea around leading the positive change and doing this is really being a staunch advocate for arts, the arts, and properly funding of the arts. And as an educator, for anyone who's like, well, I'm not sure. Listen, I can draw a direct correlation between art and math. I can draw a direct correlation between storytelling and art. Al and I have talked about this at length, and this is one of the reasons why I think Al is such an invaluable, not only close friend, but I would say creative co-conspirator here, is the whole idea around even just, like I said, filmmaking. Whatever it is, if it can represent your voice and you can do it in a way that authentically represents your community. The whole idea around you don't want someone else telling your stories for you, so why not be empowered to do it yourself? And so that's why I really encourage educators, especially again in schools that are under-resourced, is if they're trying to strip you of the arts, then figure out a way to incorporate the arts within your curriculum, within your content area. Because I can tell you right now, there's an artist who has done something that has been inspirational, motivational, and aligned with what we would call social awareness or social change within all the content areas that we can think of. So for me, I think the big thing is really pushing for an expansion of the arts so that it really serves as a degree of empowerment for our students.
Thank you so much, Ken. Al, Santi, any thoughts with the way that you innovate and create on a daily basis?
Yeah, I'd love to respond or just add on to what Ken was saying. I absolutely agree. I think the arts is always the first thing to be on the chopping block. So with a lot of the schools that I work with, I'm trying to do just that, work with the teachers and try to offer a way to support them to add these creative outlets within their curriculum. Because especially now, coronavirus, you have students that have been at home for over a year. I think we're going to see an onslaught of student trauma. And I think it's absolutely vital to offer them these outlets, no matter what they are. I love that Toiell was talking about sort of the definition of creativity and how, yes, when you think about it, you have connotations of fine art, painting, photography, but really creativity is anything where you use your imagination, right? Even just thinking about something or connecting two ideas that are seemingly unrelated. So, I think it's the duty of the educators to try to be creative and creating a space for students to really process what's happening right now. I'm seeing and hearing so many sort of instances of just students being inundated with work, sort of just keeping them busy through all this. And that's definitely not helpful. So, I mean, in terms of this idea of allowing students to express their emotions, I think it's absolutely necessary, even just listening to them and what they're feeling, because once we finally get back to school, there's going to be a lot of emotional trauma to deal with.
Absolutely. And what you said, just listening to them. I know so many educators are doing just like a daily or weekly check-in with their students, just asking them, how are you? How are you feeling? Because once again, this distance of remote learning for many of our students has been a blessing to some, but a curse to others. They may not have that ability, that outlet to be around those that they're most comfortable with and sharing and expressing, either their ideas or their frustration at the moment in time. And so once again, to have that classroom as that safe space for students to be able to communicate is highly important. And so, Al, with that being said, your shirt says creativity saved my life. And I'm thinking about those students who might be struggling with so many things right now. And that shirt is just speaking so much to me. So please chime in.
Yeah, so I hate to be the person that just says it like it is. And I think it's, for me, it's really tough for me to be able to have this conversation around allowing students to do anything, because I really just think educators on a certain level need to just get out of the way. I think a part of this process of being creative and being able to share your voice, a lot of it is students being able to decolonize themselves from all of the years of being told that they need to do education this way, they need to learn this way, they need to do it in this nice, neat, packaged way. And I think the more we can get to the place where we're allowing students just to be able to share what they know, share what they've learned in creative ways, I think those things are going to really unlock the true potential of what education can be. So I think a lot of it is figuring out ways. I know that it may be frustrating for you to be able to try to introduce and try to figure out where do I get time to be able to introduce creativity into the classroom and be able to help students be able to embrace and be able to share things in creative ways and to process their emotions. I would say this should be at the core of the work that we're doing. In every aspect, this should be something that we're pushing to be able to create space for students to be able to do this. And I think part of it for me has also been during this time, because I've been a campus administrator as well, is being able to understand that a lot of our students have been labeled that they can't be successful in the classroom. And then now they're in this time of pandemic and they've actually been successful. They've actually been able to process and be able to get their work and get the things done that they need to, and then spend that time in doing other things that they want to do. And I've even heard educators or certain education systems penalizing students because students need more work. They obviously need more work because they're getting it done too fast, or they're being able to handle these things. And I think it's a space where we really need to think about why we're doing that and why are our students being successful. Those students that we think can't be successful, they're now being successful. What's happening in education that we're missing the mark in a lot of those places? We're not giving students an opportunity to be able to do these things. And I think the big thing is, how do we get out of the way to allow students to be able to embrace their natural state? I am a firm believer that the natural state of every individual is being creative. That's in so many different ways. It can be artistic. It can be in so many spaces. My grandmother couldn't draw to save her life, but she was very creative in the discipline that she applied to me when I needed it. So I will just tell you now, creativity can function in so many different ways. And I think it's important for us to really start it there, saying, how can I get out of the way so our students can be successful and embrace that natural state?
I absolutely love that. I actually I follow Brandan and Studio B on Instagram, and there was this post where I just saw the sheer joy in these students' faces. Now, being from New Orleans, hey, we're sneakerheads. Like, we love shoes. And these students had this opportunity to create their own shoe. Not only do the designs of it, but Brandan, I hear that the manufacturer actually created the shoe that the students made. Is that correct?
Yeah, it was a collaboration with the Jordan brand, and they got an opportunity to design for it. It started off as a contest where they were able to create designs and then pitch it to designers from Jordan brand to kind of like get feedback and see how it would work. And so the first surprise was that the shoe, that the winning group, the shoe was going to be turned into a shoe that Zion Williams was going to wear in the game. And then the second surprise was everyone who was a part of that project got a pair themselves. And so that was something like, as an adult, I'm like, yo, when I ain't even got no shoe. Can we talk to? But it was cool to see that these kids were like, because I used to sketch shoes all day in class. Like, that was just the thing I loved to do for fun. So to see that they were able to get that experience and to meet the right people, to even know how the process happens, it was valuable information and opportunity. We could speak to a lot of the ways that showing examples like that is important, or even just the agency that to see that artwork or drawing or creativity is not just something reserved for paper, or there's so many applications of it in the real world, and that's an important lesson as well.
Yeah, it takes me back to our first conversation about race, equity, and justice. We had my brother D. Lanier on, and he said, in all that you do, whatever your passion is, that's where you need to be an anti-racist. So if you have a passion in this, see how you can make that impact. So that has stuck with me every moment of the way. And so just thinking about these students, Brandan, did you see a difference in those students having that authentic experience to do something that they absolutely love, and once again can impact other people? Because we get a lot of fulfillment too from just watching how others interact by the things that we choose to do.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I think that that experience, like there was a lot of lessons learned in that experience. It was a long process. Like, it was something that took about 3 or 4 months to go to sketch to actually having in hand. It was something that I think throughout the way, there was some discouragement in terms of not thinking that it would actually manifest into the real thing. And so there were so many different lessons that I think they were able to be a part of with that process. And then to finally get, we surprised them that day. They did not know the shoes that came in, and we invited them all over to the studio, and they walked in, and it was this big unveil. And so that sort of like the excitement on their faces to see their hard work actually able to hold in their hand. I think those are the things that, from my experience, like having those experiences in school with video projects and digital media, like knowing you worked hard on something, and there was so many different lessons along the way, and then to finally see the end result, but to see how other people respond to that end result as well. It's like, those are the things that kind of cement the process and makes it like, this is something you want to do for the rest of your life, where you're like, yo, I'm really excited about this and I want to keep doing this again. Like, when's the next project? And that was sort of like the question that we got afterwards, like, okay, what's the next one? What are you doing next? And so, yeah, it definitely was a super impactful experience.
Yeah. So in transitioning, from that, Santi, hearing what Brandan said as far as that impact on the scholars, I know we as educators, we're on the grounds working with other educators in their practice to help them on their journey to be, just an educator there for their students, to be culturally responsive, to be there to understand their needs versus, where they are and how to get them, to that next level. So as an educator who works daily with other educators, maybe what advice do you have after hearing that impact that Brandan just shared? Do you have for educators on their journey, really for these changes to occur within our classrooms and beyond?
Yeah, I mean, I just want to, I guess, reiterate this fact that creativity takes on many forms. I mean, many people are saying here, you know, they think they're bad at drawing, they think they're bad at painting, all these things. I'm a terrible drawer. However, you know, I want to give myself the space to make mistakes and try to just think creatively, right? Like try to match two seemingly unrelated ideas. So I guess the first thing is like educators realize that you are in a place where you exercise creativity every day, right? To work in the classroom, to work with all these different students with different learning needs. Teachers are probably some of the most creative people in the planet, right? And like they don't get enough credit for that. So one, realize that you're a creator. And yeah, I just want to emphasize that we need to listen to our students and not inundate them with work and just check in with them. You know, I love the idea. You were saying like you check in every day using Flipgrid or another platform, but these are crazy times, you know, and we didn't even discuss in detail, you know, the things happening with race right now. So more than ever, we need to check in with our students.
Absolutely. And it's making me think of one educator in our community, Andy Knieven. Every month he does a classroom doodle for his students, which gets their minds ready, you know, for the month. And just for like lack of representation, Andy took it upon himself to share a Women in STEM every month during the month of February, and it continues on now. It's April. So it's the choices that we make as educators to really inspire our students in various ways. Anyone else, like what's your advice, or maybe do you have some resources that you would love to share with our educator community in their journey to make these changes occur for their students?
I think that it's also so important just for educators to start unlearning as well, like as we're learning, because I think that a lot of people, especially, you know, in my generation, you know, millennials and Z, like they're going into these fields with this idea that like they know what it was like, you know, being a part of these systems, and now they're older and they want to help, you know, reform and reimagine them, but they still do the same things, you know, that were practiced before. You know, we still don't have any restorative justice in our system. So it's just like, we're thinking about that instead of, oh, I want to suspend a student. Why don't we think about in-house, you know, suspension and sitting them down and talking about why they did whatever they did. Little things like that, I think are very important, because if you don't, then you push kids in a direction where they don't even want to be in school, and you can't be creative with them because they don't even care for it anymore. And so I think that it's really important for educators to not only look into the resources, you know, to find ways to be creative, but just being creative with their own understanding of what things was I taught, or what things that I watch and experience that actually are wrong. Because so many people talk about, well, this is how teachers did it when, you know, I was that age. But it's like, but who's to say that those teachers were correct, right? Because you have your own experiences that you recognize, you know, were off. So thinking about that and thinking about like, what things do I need to unlearn now at this point that now I'm in this position, and recognizing all the things that were did wrong before? What things do I need to unlearn and now be creative with changing, you know, so I can move forward in this journey as an educator?
What wonderful advice. You know, unlearning is a part of that journey, and it allows us as educators to be vulnerable to our students, to learn right alongside with them. We are not the sole experts, you know, in our classroom. We can learn and we can grow together. So beautiful advice, Toyell. Brandan, Al, any thoughts here? Any advice? Brandan, I actually have a website, Eternal Seeds, up ready to share. So if you want to speak about that too, I can share my screen.
Okay, I can go ahead. Yeah, so we recognize that there was a lot of need and power within the educators in thinking about like the resources as it relates to artists and just, you know, I was talking to a friend of mine who was an art teacher, and he was complaining about the lack of resources he was getting from his school in terms of supplies. And we thought, you know, I'm thinking about me as a student, how important art was for me, and how important just the idea of being a creative was as a student. And so that led to like the thought around us creating resources for educators. So Eternal Seeds is an aspect of that. We turned a lot of the artwork at Studio B into coloring sheets to make resources available for for teachers to give to students to kind of explore the things that were being taught in the process of going to Studio B, the representation, the people you learned about when you go through the space. And then we tasked staff there to create workshops that teachers can watch and sort of go through with their students. And the whole idea was just make it as accessible as possible. This idea of art that was representative of the students that don't often see themselves reflected in those spaces. So yeah, the advice that I would have for educators though is to just continue. I like that idea of unlearning as well. Just to continue to embrace the power that the imagination have. I think oftentimes, the product of a good schooling is to be identical to the person next to you. And I think that there is a whole lot more value in just being allowed to fully blossom as who you naturally are. And I think creativity and our imagination enforces that and informs that. And so that would be my advice as an artist, is to continue to find those special things, those special aspects of individuals, and allow those to blossom, as opposed to just making everyone the same as the next.
Absolutely. And, looking at your free resource, which is coloring sheets for students, can lead to a conversation starter. Having students, once again, curious and wondering, like, what's going on in the picture? Like, what impact is that having? I'm thinking about that Colin Kaepernick image where he's kneeling, and thinking back to a conversation that I had with another educator in our community, Randall Sampson. He said, there's a price to pay when it comes to standing up for justice. And we see that theme happening, with Colin Kaepernick, right? What is that price that he's paying, to stand up for what he believes in? And so we know that this work is not easy, but it's necessary. And everything that we're, doing here, this is a start, for many, to just tuning in and listening to various perspectives. It's someone's start on a journey, or maybe a stopping point on the journey to expand their minds a little bit more. So we know that we're in this work together. So Al and Ken, any ideas to just leave us off, some advice for educators that you may have?
Yeah, I'll go, and I know Ken will have more to add as well. But I think it's one of the things I continue to reflect on is reminding educators that in a lot of ways we're living in a time where it seems like every day we're hearing a new story of someone who has been affected by racism and just fill in the blank. And I think that it's important as educators for us to realize that you may do more harm in your approach than actually doing good. So to be very mindful of the conversations and the way that you bring these conversations forward, to be able to inquire. Not every student is ready to process and be able to share exactly where they're at. So it's something where you need to be patient. And also, I'll just tell you, as a male with many gray hairs, I'm exhausted. And I think that it's something that I've made it just a requirement that I am not constantly absorbing and taking in, because you can just be caught up in video after video. I don't need to be in that space. And I would encourage you to also to be just mindful of those conversations with your students, to understand that some of them are processing this on a daily basis. Some of them are walking and dealing with it. Some of them have had the conversation that every Black male has at a certain age, and they're still processing a number of these things. And that assignment that you think is going to be great may be put in front of them, and it just brings up things that are very painful and hurtful for them to be able to deal with. So my encouragement is through all of these great resources, and there are great resources being shared, and I'm sure Ken is going to share more as well. But I think it's important for us to be open to that. This needs to be on their timetable and not yours. And just to be very mindful of that and don't get offended.
Absolutely. And we'll be adding resources to this link that you see here, aka.ms/Flipgrid Race, Equity, and Justice. What you'll find here is topics to get the conversation started within your classroom about bias, about racism, about current events. And so each of our panelists has also shared some resources that will also add to this, as well as our current unfortunate events in the AAPI community. You'll also find resources there to support you within that conversation too. So Ken, take us home and share some other resources, because I know you work very hard with a group of educators to put together a course for educators to go through this journey into being anti-racist. So please share that with us and take us home.
Yeah, so first of all, thank you. And again, it's a privilege to be on yet another panel with an amazing group of panelists. So I want to thank all of the panelists here for your contributions, not only to our dialogue, but also to my learning. So before I guess the other thing is, as Jornay shared, I did have the privilege of working with several other educators. Hat tip to Dr. Brady, Megan and Keith, Anu and Jost. We worked on a anti-racism in education course that you can find in the Microsoft Education Center. But what I really want to point out is something like with what Santi and Al just shared. So I do have the privilege of working with a lot of school districts and a lot of district leadership. And I think that there's something that we need to really start to bring to the surface and force into the narratives. And that is the following. So this is for leaders, and then I'm going to give a comment around educators. You cannot have an effective social and emotional learning program and not have a high degree of a creative culture in your district. It is not possible, because what you have to understand is that, and even as Toiell just shared, when you are forced to operate within and perform under a colonized curriculum, that is a type of trauma. And that affects certain students, especially those of us on this panel or those that look like us on this panel, far more than it does those that don't. And so when you do that, and then now you limit or eliminate any mechanisms for creativity, creative expression, being able to amplify or use your voice in ways that represent your learning, represent your story, represent all those sorts of things, you have a trauma-inducing culture. And so then I add to that the fact that one of the things I love to ask district leadership is, what specific policies do you have that we could identify or someone could reasonably identify as learner empowerment? And what I mean by that is, what are the alternate forms of assessment? What resources are necessary for students to utilize their voice? Not voice and choice. Again, I'll go back to that. Every instance, and I know that there are exceptions, but every instance I've seen of voice and choice, the choices are limited to what the teacher wants. And then they only amplify what voices matter to them. And so if the voices are aligned with the dominant culture definitions and within the colonized curriculum narratives, those are the voices that get amplified, whereas the others don't. Don't have enough time now, but I've got lots of stories of how that affected me as a child. For the teachers, I recognize, and I'm not going to couch what I'm going to say. We do have to color in the lines. I hear all these things, and I've been in dialogue with other folks around, oh, do this, do this, do this. And I'm like, that you still have to color in the lines. Do the best you can with what you have. So for example, one of the resources that Al introduced me to that I really wish I did a similar to it, but I really wish if I were in a classroom, I could have done this. Even something as simple as this. So the YouTube channel that Al introduced me to is 60-second documentaries. I would even use that. Like, think about it. If your students, and again, the digital equity piece is a factor, but let's stipulate that if all your students have access to a cell phone, that phone has a camera. So for me, across all content areas, if I have to color in the lines and says, well, you got to teach this, you got to teach this, you got to teach this. One of the things I just encouraged a group of educators to teach geometry, I was like, I would have the kids produce a 60-second documentary on geometry in my life. How does geometry impact your life, your day-to-day things that you do, the community you're in, but strictly through the lens of geometry, and incorporate in your story the key terms that help demonstrate an understanding of geometric theatrical terminology and how it applies in your real life. So that's still coloring within the lines, because ultimately, if the curriculum says you have to teach these things, the standards, then how do you operate within that to say, how do I encourage and foster higher degrees of creativity, knowing that I cannot change the lines or move the guardrails out because I'm not the one who sets the policy. So that's why for me, I talk to the leaders about what policies you have in place and encourage and support the educators. I recognize that you still have to color in a line. So how might we operate from a high degree of creativity within those lines until we can influence the changes that need to occur?
Absolutely. And Ken, as you mentioned, it goes across the board, whether it's our school leaders, our educators, our community members, families, the students, but this work starts with self too, right? And so thank you, each of you, for sharing a bit of yourself, a bit of your journey, your creativity with our educator community. I know so many people are now inspired and empowered to think about who's sitting in front of them, whether it's in the classroom or virtually at this moment in time, and how to tap into their creativity, or once again, just give the students that space to use creativity as an outlet for them to communicate, to share their ideas, and ultimately to change the world. So check out the Master's Tools game for systems of oppression. Check out Studio B and all the greatness that's coming from there. EternalSeeds.com is the website where you can find the coloring sheets, which are incredible. There's also an educator's guide to go along with that. We will add those resources to our Race, Equity, and Justice collection. And until next time, we are here to support you in everything that we do. Tune into our Thursdays community conversations. This week, we will be celebrating Earth Day, but these conversations will continue to happen on Flipgrid around race, equity, and justice, because it is embedded in our mission to empower every learner on the planet to share their voice and to respect the diverse voices of others. Until then, go out and empower every voice. Bye, everyone.